All right, welcome to the Lovecraft eZine podcast. Today is March the 22nd, 2020.
Today is March the 22nd.
We are echoing in Bridget's speaker. Um, okay, please continue your conversation about Philadelphia, Pete and Melissa.
Well, Melissa and I were just talking because we're both from the Philadelphia area, and we were reminiscing over the Blob, which was filmed
Yeah.
in Phoenixville and parts of I think downtown Gettysburg.
Downingtown. So Downingtown, there's a diner that it was filmed at.
Yeah.
That I'm not sure if it's still there, but at the Colonial Theater, I actually love the Colonial Theater. Is awesome, and they have a big festival every year, Blob Fest. The Blob Fest. They had the blob on display. You could go up into their attic and like look at the piece of the blob in like a special tub. It was like such a cool, cool thing. They play lots of movies. They play the blob. Lots of cool B movies.
You can eat pieces of the blob if you go to Pat's King of Steaks.
It's the Shoggoth
Probably.
Memorial.
It is like a Shoggoth, yeah. It's awesome.
Okay,
Just
so
just to
Rick.
clarify, this is the Steve McQueen version,
Yeah,
not the
The
remake.
original, yeah.
From the,
not the Son of Blob or
Nope.
Beware the Blob.
or the remake.
Or the remake.
I hope everyone watching this is writing this down.
Blob 4, the reblobbing.
All right, so for those who are watching live and texting in the sidebar, hey guys, how's it going? And for those who are watching later or listening later, I'll try to get the audio podcast version of this out this week, midweek, later than last week. I got it out later than I would have liked. It was a hectic week. There's some weird things going on. You guys probably haven't heard about it.
Yeah,
I live under a rock. I don't know what's going on.
you could have told me that a global pandemic was mysteriously infecting people without them knowing or realizing, and then mercilessly proliferating, and I wouldn't have believed you. And then here we are.
Okay, before we do introductions, this is important. There's a strong possibility that Kelly Young is watching live. We'll see if he comments in the sidebar. So if he comments in the sidebar, then feel free to make any Kelly Young jokes that you want. If he doesn't, then I assume he's doing something more important than watching us.
We just have to say Kelly Young, and that is the best joke we have.
Sure. We're gonna talk to Akira, who is coming up. We're gonna talk to Akira, who is one of, correct me if I'm wrong, the translators for the flock of Bahui. Am I saying that correctly?
It's hard to tell how to say it correctly because it is a Chinese.
Okay. Close enough.
Bahui. Bahui is usually the closest way to say it.
Okay.
Bahui.
The flock of BA-HUI, for those of you who want to look it up on Amazon. I do have it linked in the show notes.
Yeah.
This is kind of an amazing first. I know that Matt and Rick have talked about this for several years now, that there's a lot of Lovecraftian and cosmic horror stories out there written in other languages that we don't know about and would love to read if we could. So I'm not sure if this is a first, but it's the first one I've heard of. So this is pretty exciting. Then later, you know what? Melissa suggested a weird fiction quarantine list, or book reader list, and movies. Rick's got a YouTube channel to promote that you can watch during this self-imposed quarantine. And then later on, I believe we're going to get Alan Baxter. He's like 16 hours ahead of us. So it's Sunday evening here. It's Monday morning there for him. So he's got a class, and then he's going to come back in as soon as he can. So anyway, let's do introductions and go from there. Hey, Rick.
Rick Lay Writer.
Yeah, this does move around, doesn't it? It's hard to...
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, that's just why I keep forgetting someone every single time since we installed Zoom. Pete.
What? Oh, sorry.
Yes, exactly.
Pete Rawlick, furiously working on stories about Halsey, Peasley, and Lydecker. So.
Oh my.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Matt.
Hi. I have a prize this week. My name's Matt Carpenter. The prize is a first edition hardcover copy of the Stephen King novel Revival, which is very Lovecraftian. So if you want this, send an email to ezineprizes@gmail.com and put Revival in the title, and we will pick a winner in about 2 weeks.
Yeah. So those of you listening in your car in the next couple of weeks, this is March the 22nd. You know, you've got plenty of time to do that. Okay, Melissa.
Hi, I'm Melissa, just a Lovecraft fan. I also have a webpage where I do book reviews, just specializing in Lovecraftian and weird fiction.
And also a plush Cthulhu behind you.
And I have a plush Cthulhu. Yeah, he's my buddy.
I think this is Rich. He's labeled as Rich. So if this new guy wants to introduce himself.
Yeah, Rich. I used to have a beard. Now I just have a library.
It's a good trade-off.
Okay, Ben.
Ben Handelman. I help make sure Mike can function properly during these shows.
Gallery view. Yeah, I guess that's okay.
Yeah. See, right now, what he's talking about is the software we're using has a view called Gallery.
Oh,
This shouldn't be titled
figure that
the
out.
gallery view. This should be titled,
Hollywood Squares.
yes,
This
exactly.
way, Mike
Or
can no
Or
longer.
the Brady Bunch, yes.
Brady Bunch. Yeah.
I think
I love this.
Melissa for the win.
Oh my God. And this is, you know what? This is awesome because when I change it, me personally, since I'm the host, it changes for everybody watching.
For everyone, yes.
I'm
But
gonna-
it allows
I'm
you to
gonna
go in
keep-
an order.
I'm going to keep it this way.
Are we the Lovecraft bunch then?
We're
Yeah,
the
we are.
Lovecraft Bunch, yes.
Yeah.
See,
So we have 9 people here. It's not, the gallery view is not leaving anyone out.
So Bridget has to come up with our theme song now because she's the musician in our group.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Hey, yeah. There you go.
Did we introduce everybody?
Not me.
Not me. Okay, Bridget.
Hi, I'm Bridget. I write music and I create art. Big horror fan, and I love making horror art and haunted music boxes.
Do you write the songs that make the whole world cry?
Yes, something like that.
Okay.
Or go mad. It's a 50-50.
The whole world scream.
So what's the screen?
Songs that leave you feeling never quite the same again.
Okay, so Ben, technical question before we continue. Do we have 9 people in here? This gallery view doesn't leave anybody
1,
out?
2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I count 9, but also I'm, Pete's the scientist, so really he should be the one counting us.
It's 3 squared.
I can count to 9. I'm not a math whiz, but I can count to 9. I'm just checking. Okay, so who else is going mad from Cabin Fever? I'm not.
Me.
I'm going mad from the number of people in my house. So
No.
I'm going mad having to make all of my own food all the time.
Oh, yeah, that'll do it too.
Oh yeah. I mean, imagine
Yeah.
like you're jonesing for some.
Yeah, my son just called me from Madison, and he's running out of frozen burritos. What can he do? What can he do?
What do I do now?
So
How do I cook a frozen pizza?
Mandy called me mad when I stocked up on shrimp, fish, and scallops. And now I look like a genius.
Yeah.
But no, Pete. Sorry, that's not quite what you look like. But do go on.
No. Actually, I look very, very comfortable in my nice little smoking jacket.
You
here.
do look
It's
very
the
comfortable.
story
His drinking jacket.
of a man named Rollick. All
I'm
right.
going for my Hugh Hefner look. But
Yeah.
it's like
No.
Hugh Hefner crossed with Vince Vaughn after
No,
Batman.
I got a bunch of questions for Akira.
Yeah, let's go with that.
Me?
Yes, that's a good idea.
Yeah, let's go with that. I'm in love with this gallery view, Ben. You should have
Is
told me
that
this.
why I'm here?
Well, I mean, you can talk about the stock market if you'd rather.
I was having such a fun time just
No, we can do that too.
Goofing
When we're done
around.
talking to you, you can hang out with us. We talk about a lot of
the Brady Bunch that must not be
nonsense things, you know.
Oh shit! Now that I've got to write that.
What?
The Brady Bunch that must not be.
Oh Jesus!
This would be an excellent short story. Yes.
So, like,
Definitely do that.
instead of going to Hawaii, they go to like Ponape.
I love it. Yes.
Bit of relay.
After all, her name is Marsh. Never mind.
Mark, yeah.
Oh no. Oh no.
Okay. All right. So here, let me
Yes.
start off the questions, if you don't mind.
No,
getting back on
sure.
go right ahead, Matt.
Okay.
Go for it.
So, one of the things that always kind of interests me is, like, I read a Pakistani author who wrote a story for a Lovecraftian collection, and he said, frankly, the folklore of Pakistan was so full of evil spirits and monsters and otherworldly creatures, he didn't need to draw on Lovecraft for any kind of creative mojo. And then I always thought the same thing of Japan. They have such a rich folklore of spirits and unfriendly creatures.
Right.
And yet, when Lovecraft got introduced into Japan, which might have been in the 70s or 80s in translation, it was like Derleth in translation, and it started percolating there. And then there ended up being a very rich tradition of manga and comics and even certain movies, as well as short stories that we've barely been exposed to. I was just wondering, the folklore of China extends back literally 5,000 years. What is it that seems to have precipitated an interest in Lovecraft, or is there really no way to come to a conclusion there?
Well, I think what did it was that Lovecraft was really a historical phenomenon of a person. Like at the time he was writing, civilization and science had made enough strides that they were starting to make big, bold claims about the way that reality actually was, and people were uncertain about what they had believed for millennia, and the way that the universe was fundamentally structured, and things like discovering how far away the other galaxies in the sky really were, and Darwin proposing the theory of evolution, and all of these different concepts happening on a global scale, and rising up in the consciousness of civilization at the time, kind of paved the way for a renaissance in horror fiction, because a lot of the components of those burgeoning philosophies and scientific theories were actually quite terrifying. Like, yes, humanity's always thought that they were special and important in the center of the universe, and that things have meaning, but no, it turns out that you're a speck of insignificant dust on a tiny marble rotating around a slow explosion that's millions of years old, and it doesn't really matter whether you live or die another day or 100 years.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, Akira, but about the time of Lovecraft, the universe in everybody's mind was just the Milky Way galaxy, and then they started to learn that they called it the island universe, and then they realized there were billions of other galaxies like the one we're living in.
Yeah, and so Lovecraft was really the first person to incorporate these new discoveries in science into his fiction and make it terrifying, and like draw out the proposals in those scientific theories that actually are in a way terrifying and antithetical to the human soul in a way. Everybody knows that, well, everybody feels that life has meaning, and we're trying to justify what it is and why. And a lot of the ways that people come around to, actually this matters the most, or actually nothing matters. They kind of take circuitous paths to get there. But the fact is that the quest for meaning is something very human and innate. And the reason that it took, even though that some cultures had, Oni or it's slipping my mind what the hopping zombies are. Jiangshi, yeah, right, in China. Hopping vampire zombie things. Um,
Liang.
yeah, and all of the other various traditions of like fairy tales and spooky stories. Those are all well and good. Monsters are monsters are monsters. But to propose a monstrosity of the universe itself, and also to incorporate into that this idea of incomprehensibility, like things that are not only bigger and stronger and scarier than you are, but things that defy comprehension, things that escape what we know to be true in a way that implies we know almost nothing about what is actually true. Lovecraft took a bunch of old-timey tropes and he made them meta. It's like, yeah, nobody had ever really done that before for anything, and that's why he's still remembered today. Is that
How did it get to China?
how did it get to China?
Right. I mean, it's like the way that I read the introduction to the book
Yeah.
was that there is a server, an online group of people
Yeah.
who share weird fiction,
yeah,
and there's a little bit of a thriving, tiny Lovecraftian community there, maybe. But
Yeah.
tiny in China means humongous here.
well, yeah.
So I was wondering, do you know anything about how that got started, or how widely it's disseminated?
I do know that the music of Erich Zahn or Elrich Zahn, the guy with the violin,
Yeah, Eric Zahn. Yeah.
Eric, yeah. There was a translated copy in some. It might have been. I'll have to look this up. Actually, give me 1 second. I don't want to say something incorrect, but there have been translations of Lovecraft floating around China in the weirdest places for a little while.
Yeah, can I just butt in with the question here? Because
Yeah,
part
sure.
of your, and then get back to Matt, because part of your description of the book on Amazon was from the Stygian depths of the Chinese internet. We proudly present 4 wholly original tales of cosmic horror based on the works of H.P. Lovecraft. And Matt said something that I wasn't aware of. You were I think it was you, Matt, talking about how the deep web in China and that it's kind of unregulated. Akira, you would know better than us, but you made that comment, I think, Matt.
It was just based out of the introduction that it is not everything's as draconian as you might think, and there's a certain liberality in terms of the creative juices flowing, particularly in science fiction and weird fiction. I was just kind of curious. Like, I know, like, for example, in Charlie Strauss, the story A Colder War got translated into Japanese finally. Is like an explosion going off, you know, about adapting these concepts to modern science fiction. And I was just wondering if you had any sense of like how this kind of got started in China, or how big the phenomenon is. Is it just a select clientele or fan base?
It's definitely not a huge fan base, but it's also big enough that there is a dedicated forum for it, and everybody who is into that sort of thing in China knows about that forum, or at least if they, it's kind of like everybody knows about Reddit, right? If you use Reddit enough, you think, oh well, there might be a subreddit for this thing that I like. You can go there and look it up. Now, the Ring of Wonder isn't that prolific.
Sounds like you're saying something like a cult following.
Yeah. I mean, well, it's Lovecraft, right? It always has a cult following.
Cult meaning something different, yeah. But yeah, I know what you mean.
Okay, right.
Cult following and
my mistake.
I can't think of an example right now.
I guess I'll put away my obsidian dagger. But yeah, it's a forum called the Ring of Wonder, and it's very expansive in its scope. And as long as you're not posting about anything political or anything subversive, you can pretty much get away with whatever you want. And so over time, it's just kind of collected a huge, relatively speaking, to certain other websites. But I guess absolutely speaking, not that big enough that there is some prestige in being, the guy who makes the longest, best story. And so basically, I was fresh out of college. I had learned how to speak Chinese. I had spent some time abroad learning how to speak it in the wild. And I was thinking to myself, well, I got to do something to stay sharp. I like Cthulhu. I like Lovecraft. I love the whole concept of this like incomprehensible horror, and I think I'll combine these two things somehow. Maybe get some skin in the game. Try to invest in the success of this. Turns out that didn't work at all because I didn't come back to the project for years until I met my co-translator Arthur Marceau, and he kindly offered to use his much superior Chinese skills to kind of get the baseline book translated.
Hey, I'm sorry, I need to stop you for one
Oh,
second.
sure. Yeah,
So,
I'm just rambling.
I'm a lay person here.
Right.
So are you talking about speaking Mandarin? And then is the script for Mandarin different than, say, for Cantonese or some other related language? It's just I just don't know. I was curious.
They use the same script, and the Flock of Bahui is in Mandarin.
Okay, so how did you come across this author Ubamob?
Well,
I don't know how he wants it pronounced. He, she.
I don't know. I mean, it's the English word bamboo backwards,
Oh.
so I can only imagine Ubmab. Maybe it's not like a very euphonic word. It's just kind of straight. It's like the name of an elder god or something, right? It doesn't really roll off the tongue very easily. So what I was doing basically, I was trying to go around and figure out, well, Lovecraft is awesome. I speak Chinese. Surely people who are writing Chinese also think that Lovecraft is awesome somewhere out there in the internet. And I searched for this, I searched for that. The thing that was giving me the most hits was this forum, the Ring of Wonder, and they had a sub forum for like H.P. Lovecraft and the Call of Cthulhu, and in
Okay,
that
so the
sub forum.
Let me interrupt with just a real quick question. The Ring of Wonder, is that only accessible in China?
No, you can. It's a normal website.
Okay.
I don't exactly remember the URL, but it's like trow. Maybe CC? trow.cc?
Not that I speak Chinese, but I was just curious. Or
No,
Mandarin or anything else.
And I started asking people like, hey, I want to translate one of these stories because they look really long and they're awesome, but I don't know which one to translate because I'm not that great at reading yet. So please tell me which one to translate. They're like, you need to do this one. And I'm like, this one? And they're like, yeah, everybody says this is the best one. And I'm like, okay. And so...
Was that Arthur, your co-translator?
No, these were just other people on the site. They were just
okay.
just other users who I had been asking just publicly, like, all right, I want to translate something. Which one should I do? They're like, well, this one, everybody has been saying needs to be translated into English for a long time. So please do this one. And here we are.
Yeah, so out of that you got what everyone was saying, hey, these are some of the 4 best stories floating around on the Chinese internet.
Well, so everybody agreed that the Flock of Bahui was the one to translate. And then that same author had written the other 3 stories, which we piled in there to kind of make something book length and not maybe, a little pamphlet. Because we did want to get it on paper.
Yeah.
Did the original have that framing device that you use?
No, that was all Arthur's doing. Is Arthur's story ties them all together for the sake of forming a book.
Okay, so that was inserted.
Yeah.
Matt, you have more questions? You're muted right now.
Sorry. I know, for example, when we were looking at the English translations of the Japanese fiction in the series by Kuroda Press, sometimes it was very seamless and natural feeling language. So the English translator had, instead of going for, say, literalism, had gone for expressive content, shall we say.
Oh yeah.
And then there were some times where it was like, not to be uncharitable, but it was clumsier. You know, it's like the language didn't flow as naturally, the speech didn't seem as like just a couple of guys having a conversation. So when you set about to translate, like, were there lots of made up words? Like, you know, you try and translate Dr. Seuss into Chinese. I'm thinking, well, that'll be a challenge. You know, I translated one fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish into Latin for a high school senior project. Okay, so you have to make up a lot of words. So how does this work? Like, when you look at the story unvarnished in Mandarin script?
Well, it's kind of hard to make up new characters in Mandarin. So what you often have to do is you have to just spell out phonetically what the word is. There weren't too many of those. A lot of times, like, the proper names you will see in the stories are real places and maybe references to other historical sites. And so in the rare cases where there is a proper name that isn't a actual character, then they just spelt it out phonetically. But there was a lot of, like you said, awkward language, and Ubmab was using the grammar of Chinese to kind of simulate the long-winded, complex language that Lovecraft himself uses, which was really fascinating to me to read through it, because, you know, there was relative clauses within parentheticals, and that was honestly probably one of the hardest parts, is getting that feeling, being faithful to the language as it was in Chinese, in English, without making the English sound unreadable, or not necessarily sound, but read poorly. Because the way that you make Chinese Lovecraftian is not the way that you make English Lovecraftian, and so we had to kind of do a two-phase transition process where we got the meaning of the words from Chinese to English, and then we Lovecraftianified the English meaning of the words while referencing the original Chinese to make sure that, okay, well, this parenthetical is having this effect on the rest of the flow, and you're right. So there was a very involved process that we underwent, trying to remain faithful to the both the structure of the original language and the Lovecraftian aesthetic that it was going for.
So you had to impose Lovecraft's style?
No. We didn't impose the Lovecraft style on it. What we had to do was we had to maybe sometimes transpose it rather than imposing it, because it's there and we tried to keep it the same, but we maybe had to shuffle things around a little bit to get the English sounding natural.
I'm a very lay person at this, but okay, so if you're going to say grammatically going from Mandarin to English, what's the hardest thing to get right? Or where are the big pitfalls?
So it's really easy to just say stuff like his mother, who well, maybe I can do better with an example here, because Chinese is a very analytical language.
A very what language? I'm sorry.
Analytical.
I see.
So it's easy to stack a bunch of things together in a row and have a sentence that has an unambiguous meaning. But if you were to write it out in English, it would seem like a run-on sentence, because you would say, number 1, the Kunlun scriptures and the classic of Mountain and Seas. Number 2, the unfathomable 7 books. Number 3, and the last one, the records of the great wilderness, a scroll which was secret, which in the past drove a great king to make an attempt to set fire to every book on the earth, right? And so in Chinese, that sounds fine. in English, you kind of have to embellish the raw meaning to get something closer to a forbidden scroll that once drove an emperor to try to burn every copy in existence. So, yeah, there's challenges with turning what is fine in Chinese into something that is equally Lovecraftian and also artful in English.
Yeah, actually, I've got several questions from Kat Pulver, who is author Joe Pulver's wife. They live in Germany. He's from the United States. She's from Germany. Speaks, I don't know, at least English and German. I don't know if she speaks any more languages, but I believe she's translated some or more of Joe's work. So let me just read her questions here. Here are some, let's see. Translating fiction is both a very rewarding and sometimes daunting work. As I said, she knows this. Now, I think Matt and Rick have asked a version of this question, so if so, if there's nothing to add, just tell me that. She's got 3 questions. The first is, sometimes it's utterly impossible to translate words or phrases one-to-one. If you have to translate a phrase or an idiom, are you trying to stick as close as you can with the original words, or are you using a more common English phrase or idiom?
So I definitely have that problem a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And because Chinese has I don't even know if you would call it a pattern. They just have this very strong historical tradition of 4 character idioms. And so long time no see is an English direct translation of one of those idioms. Hao jiu bu jian, like it literally means long time no see. Mm-hmm. There's other things, but each idiom, even though it only contains 4 characters, it can actually refer to a very complex historical event that had lots of backstory and lots of context. And so when you say 4 sides Chu singing song, or 4 sides Chu song, right? CHU, as in like a proper name of the Chu people or the Chu area. It means you're embattled on all sides and there's no hope of escape because back in history, the Chu people were sieged on all 4 sides of this massive fortress and they began to sing a sorrowful song. And so like something like that in English, if somebody says, how's work going? It's like, oh, it's terrible. I'm singing the Chu song because I'm surrounded on 4 sides. Like, what does that even mean? You really have to go the extra mile to make sure that all of that meaning is, well, or at least some excusable analog for that meaning is transferred. So what I did was, after getting what the idiom was supposed to accomplish down, like, okay, well, it's communicating these 3 or 4 things about the situation. And maybe it has some additional context that is not necessarily essential. Like, it doesn't matter that it was the Chu people who were singing the song or the Ba people or whatever. If it was possible, I would use a metaphor or a simile that kind of contained the same elements, because in English you could say, I'm surrounded on all sides by people who need me to do stuff. And that kind of gets a lot of the same meaning. It doesn't have the artful, sorrowful song that you're singing.
Right.
It doesn't have the historical context of, this actually happened. It's not like Tolkienian, but it gets a lot of the same thing across. And so my first resort was to use a metaphor or a simile that had a lot of the same elements as the actual 4-character idiom, which is called a Chengyu, if anybody wants to look it up. And the next resort was probably just to, it's actually been quite a while since I did one of these. I think there wasn't actually anything that I couldn't adequately describe in a metaphor.
Yeah. Well, she asked some good questions, and Kat's second question, I think
Yeah, please.
she and you can correct me if I'm wrong. She's watching live. It seems to me, like Matt, I'm a layperson with this stuff, as kind of a subset of what you just answered. But her question is, as a translator, there's always the temptation to include your own style
Mm.
or preferred way of phrasing things.
Hmm.
Are you trying to keep as close to the author's original voice as you can, even if this makes reading the, I assume, English text more difficult?
Mm.
So, any additional thoughts on that, or do you think that's been answered?
I do actually have additional thoughts on that
All right.
because I know what she means. Um, Especially because, like I said, Chinese is a very analytical language, and so you may have a very plain series of words and a very unambiguous meaning, but the context of those words and the context of the situation that the character's in may be communicating something that isn't in the text, but it is very evident to a Chinese reader. And so in the English translation, you have to kind of go the extra mile of stating plainly things that a Chinese reader is expected to intuit or already understand. And so I wouldn't say I was so much tempted to put my own spin on things or, improve it in various ways as I was kind of obliged to linger on certain points for longer than the actual text did.
Because it was kind of assumed that in Chinese.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Now,
Making things explicit.
Yeah.
okay, now, are people on the Ring of Wonder aware that this English translation has happened? Or
Yes.
are they anticipating any kind of critical response or reception? Do you know?
As far as I know, I've been in contact with Umab several times over the past couple of years, and he does know that the book is out. I haven't personally seen any of the reactions to the book being out that I come to think of it, and now that you mention it, I probably should be going out and looking for it. But the great thing about the Ring of Wonder is it is a public forum, and so I guess the only issue is that you need to speak Chinese,
Which is a big issue for me.
which is a big issue. Although with Google Translate coming bundled with Chrome now, it might be possible to kind of load up the website and try to.
You might get the general gist, but that doesn't take the place of someone like you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
All right, so-
or Arthur.
So the actual translation took how long? How long was that work?
Are you talking? Are you asking about the calendar years between start and finish?
No, like when you
or-
actually finally things came together, you were going to start working toward a book.
Mhm.
So you got your partner involved, and how long did it take to then come up with a working translation that could be published?
Okay. Well, I translated probably the first 25% on my own, and that took maybe the weekends of, I think, 2 months.
Wow.
It was hard because I wasn't anywhere near fluent enough to do something like that on my own, as you can see, because I burned out on it. And then I think maybe 2 or 3 years later, I brought this up to Arthur, and he said, "Well, I actually speak Chinese fluently, and it wouldn't be any problem for me to translate this." And over the next, I think it was, he had a couple of obligations in real life, and so it may have taken 4 months total of his free time crunching really hard. Now that I think about it, it might have been 6 months, because he would also wait on me to go over his translated text and reference back to the Chinese and kind of make it more Lovecraftian, to get the whole thing crunched out after like the remaining 75%. So less than a year all told but in real time it took like 4 years because I waited so long in between starting and failing and taking it back up again.
So,
Well, yeah, go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
I was just wondering. Okay, so 4 years is a long time in an author's creative life. Also, are there more texts out there that are worthy of us seeing, that you've got your eye on, or that Oobmob wants to see in print?
You know, there is a huge repository of Chinese fiction out there, even just on the Ring of Wonder, but on other websites as well. And I think that we already have talked about like the successor to the Flock of Bahui. You know, are we going to do more Oobmob stories? Are we going to get another author in, or do a medley? Really, the sky's the limit because there's just so, it's like you said, it may be a similar percentage of people who are into Lovecraft in China as it is elsewhere in the world. So it's a small percentage of people for a given population. But because there's so many people in China, then there's actually quite a large number of fans who are producing a significant body of work. And the only thing between us and them is the translation.
I don't want to. I'd like to move on to maybe synopsis of the stories themselves.
Sure.
Maybe a spoiler-free synopsis of that first story, the Flock of Bahui, or however you pronounce it. I'm sorry.
Spoiler-free synopsis, huh? Yeah. That's probably my one gripe with a lot of the reviews of the book is that they contain lots of spoilers. It's like, what?
Yeah,
man, what you doing? What's your whole?
You mean like on Amazon or other sites? Or?
Not on Amazon. I mean, so the Taipei Times actually did a review on the book, and they essentially summarized the plot for about 75% of the article. And,
oh, jeez. Yeah. Summarize. I see this on Amazon a lot too. Summarizing the synopsis of the book is not a review.
Yeah, right.
You know. And
I don't know.
My favorite movie example is there was a couple of good trailers for the movie What Lies Beneath with Harrison Ford and Michelle Pfeiffer.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was this one trailer that gave away a huge spoiler. It just, and for those who haven't seen it, I won't say what it is, but yeah, it made me want to avoid trailers for the most part. So, and any book reviews, it always irks me when it's not that contains spoilers. It always really irks me, as it does you, I'm sure, that it's not indicated that there's spoilers in the review.
Oh yeah.
So.
Well.
So yes, spoiler-free review, and if it's just a couple of sentences, that's fine. we want people to, this sounds like you guys selected the cream of the crop, at least just, or some really good stories to start with. Everyone was saying, hey, this one needs to be translated if you translate something.
Yeah. This was a community consensus. Like, if you're going to translate something, please do the Flock.
Yeah, it wasn't you and Arthur going, okay, this one,
Mm-hmm.
I want people to buy the book because obviously the 4 stories are group selected, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. So, a brief synopsis is, an archaeologist makes a discovery which calls into question the entire history of the human race. And he gets disbarred from a lot of talks, and people start calling him crazy. He begins working fervently, and some say he's gone insane. Burns down his apartment and disappears.
Yeah, he sounds a little insane.
Yeah.
All right.
But digging into his notes, the ones that survived the fire anyway, his colleague starts to suspect that he actually wasn't so crazy after all. And so he goes looking for him in the last place he was known to have been, way out in the boondocks of China, at this archaeological dig site.
Yeah, sounds pretty Lovecraftian.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we move on to the next stage of the podcast, anyone have any final questions for Akira?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
Rick. I'm sorry, Melissa. You're next. So,
Okay.
Rick.
Okay. One of the problems with translating with languages that have a different alphabet is names.
Hmm.
And I'm just wondering is how you knew it was Cthulhu, Yig, and all these names of gods, and we even get the phrase from At the Mountains of Madness that Shuggas, Yell, Telekili, or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Was there a standard translation of Lovecraft which the author used? We got all the names from.
Yeah. Typically, what will happen is so the Chinese language actually has a very constrained set of valid syllables compared to English. English has a ton of different consonants and vowels that we can use, and Chinese is not as freeform. And so the process of taking an outside word and kind of turning it into a Chinese word that is valid in the syllables structure of Chinese usually only results in one or two possible different interpretations of that. So the official word usually is just kasu lu, right? You take what's already an import word, like it's supposed to be unpronounceable with a human tongue, right? I've seen people argue about how to pronounce Cthulhu. It's like, oh, it's actually Cthulhu.
Oh yeah, many
yeah.
people.
Right. Well, in Chinese, you don't have as many options because it's consonant vowel optional consonant with a very limited set of letters and words.
Okay, Melissa.
Okay.
When were the original stories written? Are they like written in the past 20 years?
Yeah. I believe they're all less than 10 years old.
Okay.
If I think maximum they might be 13 years old at the max. Because I discovered them in 2014.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. And then I also wanted to know, so like Lovecraft always used like local places when he wrote. So like you were saying, like some of the story was based on different locations in China. Like, do you think there is a kind of like that localism in those stories where you? Like,
yeah. There's absolutely like there are real places with landmarks and actual structures that exist in those places. It's all extremely authentic.
I really like that. I like when authors use like where, whatever area they're from, if they describe that, because it kind of gives you the experience, like, that you necessarily wouldn't be in that area, but you can kind of read about it and it kind of adds authenticity.
Yeah, and I like to do that when I was running a adventure set in a particular city or a particular location where I had spent some time growing up, right? Everyone was like, wow, it felt like I was really there. There was such detail in all your descriptions. And I'm like, yeah, well, I lived there for like 10 years. So I know exactly what it looked like. And so, it makes sense that as an author, if you've been to a place, you lived in a place, you have like put a bunch of awesome details in that story that you just,
reminds me of a short story I wrote. Matt read it later and said how much detail and how realistic it was, and I was like, yeah, it's a real place. I just embellished on the supernatural. So
and
yes,
funny. Yeah, it's funny because sometimes like it's boring to you because you maybe grew up there, but to other people it's more exciting because it's exotic or different to them. So it's kind of to have that authenticity, it can be good. And yeah, like you're saying, like people are like, oh, I felt like I was really there because it's like you write what you know. So yeah.
Okay, Pete.
So you've gone from Chinese to English.
I just want to point out that no one has to raise their hand except for Pete. So yeah, go ahead.
He gets a gold star.
Read between the lines, right?
The teacher gives him a gold star.
So you've taken stories from Chinese to English. Have you considered taking stories from English to Chinese?
I don't think I'm the right guy to do that. as much as I am interested in the Chinese language and the kind of the whole world of different fiction and cultural kind of experiences that are accessible only in Chinese, I would need to spend probably years developing my language skills before I was even remotely ready for anything like that. Because, I mean, I'm very fortunate to speak English as a native language. And Lovecraft's kind of, the level at which his language operates is very high. Because it has to be offensively complicated, but also appealing. It has to be...
offensively complicated, man. I love that phrase.
That's going to be a title for my next collection. Offensively complicated.
Offensively complicated, right? But also appealing. You know, there's a paradox that you have to do, and you have to pull it off well. You know, there's people who can do offensive, and there's people who can do complicated, but not a lot of people can do either of those well.
I think Pete can do offensively complicated pretty well.
Ligotti does offensively complicated.
Who?
Tom Ligotti.
Oh, yes.
Oh, Ligotti,
yeah, it's complicated, but I'm not really offended. Some people are. So, are you raising your hand, Ben? Are you raising?
I am raising my hand.
I don't see a hand.
Going back to the name translation thing. So one difference with Chinese and most other languages, when you translate them into Roman characters, is Chinese has its own pronunciation system called pinyin, which I shouldn't be explaining this to you. It's more for our general viewers. I'm curious. So to give an example, I always think back to Romance of the Three Kingdoms. One of the main characters' name is Cao Cao. If I think I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yeah,
but it's spelled Cao. So the video games for years translated it as Cow Cow.
Right.
And it took literally like 10 years for them to finally correct that. When you're translating the names in your stories, are you translating them in just Romanizing the names, or are you actually, am I making sense here, like phonetically translating them?
Right. So these names are not phonetic translations, they are just opinion.
Okay.
So, you know, page 108, there's Lao Godlin, but you might see, oh, it's Lao Gellin, right?
Right.
There's also not we don't have the little tone diacritics on everything.
Of course. Okay, yeah, I was just curious. And then my other question was, so I know there's a series of novels, light novels called Vampire Hunter D, and I remember reading a bunch of those.
Oh, dude. Yeah, okay.
Great. And so the same author, he wrote a book that was like a Dracula prequel set in Japan. I don't remember what the Japanese name is, and it's in English. It was called Tales of Meiji Dracula: The Dark Wars, or something weird like that. But in the translation, because it was a new translator, she would kind of give little asides on some of the historical stuff, because he includes Jigoro Kano, for example, the creator of judo. And there are some historical facts that, like, he had this big tournament, and then all these different martial arts communities competed, and judo won, or at least that's the myth.
So annotated, basically.
It's not annotated, though. It's in the text, like in the paragraph.
Oh, okay.
She would put like a little like comma and then like this little aside. And so I was kind of curious, like, how do you handle those kind of cultural, because it's an important cultural context for the story. Are you doing footnotes? Do you do
we have footnotes
like that?
Okay. We have a lot of footnotes, and I think most of that is in the Flock. The other stories have similar but less frequent, like kind of culturally necessary annotations. But I was even tempted to do it for like place names that were like if. So Australia, right? It literally means the land of the South. But unless you know Latin, you may not know that. It's like having Greenland being called Borealia. Like, nobody calls Greenland Borealia, but that's the equivalent of Australia. stuff like that, where maybe a little bit of digging was needed to figure out why the thing was called what it was. But it was very rewarding as a translator when I figured out, oh, okay, actually, I can put this in a footnote and people will have what a Chinese reader would have had approaching this story.
Okay, yeah, that's so. Whenever I think of translation, that always seems to be the hardest part to me. And I mean, even when people are translating ancient works like the Iliad, the culture is so different and so hard to believe that half those translations have, 20-page introductions before every book.
Oh yeah.
And by the way, going back to Vampire Hunter D, if anyone hasn't read them, they're amazing, and there's tons of Lovecraftian stuff all through the series. Just everyone should pick those up. There, you can get them pretty cheap, I think, on Kindle.
I've only seen.
It post the link in the side chat, Ben, if you're able to.
Oh, I will.
Okay.
I will.
I've only seen the movie. Oh yeah, I see. Rick has a question. I just wanted to say about Vampire Hunter D. I've seen the movie Vampire Hunter D 2000, or I think it's was it like Bloodlust 2000 or something?
You're talking about the second one, right?
I don't know.
It came out. So there's one that came out in the 80s that was sort of an adaptation of the first book. There's one that came out in the early 2000s that was, I think it's an adaptation of. It's either the third or fourth book. Also, when they put them in English, the order.
I think it's the one that came out in 2000 then.
Yeah,
because it was definitely not an 80s anime style.
Yeah, so that's the good one.
Yeah, it was truly incredible. One of the better anime movies I've ever seen.
Okay,
I'd recommend tracking down the novels because they and I'll post the link in the chat for what the novels are.
Okay.
Okay, so
I
Akira,
got a question.
Rick definitely has a question.
oh, he's got his hand up. Sorry.
For like 20 minutes while we talk about anime.
Yeah, that's all right. No problem. I was glad to hear about anime. My favorite story in the book was the one called Black Taisu. Is
Black
that
Taisui.
Yeah. Was Tai Sui a genuine legend of China that got incorporated?
So actually, Arthur did the research on whether Black Taisui was a real legend. Let me see here. There's this. Hang on, because there's a lot of his research here that kind of makes it.
Yeah, because Arthur's is he
That's
currently
what
in is he currently in China because he couldn't make it? It was too much of a time difference.
Yeah, he might be at work already at this point.
Yeah. Funny that you mentioned Australia.
I don't believe that Taisui is actually a legend. However, the fact that it is being treated like one of several different kinds of legends, like in China, like the Fairy Mountains, those are a real legendary place, the abode of the immortals. The states, like the nations, and the historical figures that are referenced in the story are like either actual transplants from real historical legends, or like they have glasses and a mustache on compared to a different historical character that they're obviously supposed to be.
Got it.
Yeah. So.
Okay, so pronounce the name of the book for us again. And,
The Flock of Bahui.
Okay, and that's that final word is BA-HUI. It is available on Amazon. Actually, I do have the link in the show notes.
Awesome.
In the sidebar notes. And Akira, thank you so much for talking with us.
Hey, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
It was a great time.
All right. Well, you're welcome to stay or leave. It's totally up to you. We're going to talk about a few other things and talk to some guy in Australia, I think. So.
Oh, topical.
Yeah, very topical. So, if you want to leave, all you got to do is close either your software or your browser. Otherwise, stick around. It's totally up to you. So, Alan Baxter, hey man.
Hey, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Okay. It's an interesting time, but yeah, I'm okay.
Ben, is this screen driving you crazy still?
Say it again, sorry?
Doc, I'm teasing Ben.
No, so now because we have 10 people
Right.
fixes.
It's not as
Maybe
it's
people
not
didn't
quite as
notice.
cool.
Or it was cutting off Rich and Bridget, and at the time
Just
Akira, so
just
it's
barely,
fixed now.
Mr. Perfectionist.
So
Hey,
Ben,
just
I'm going to drive
barely.
you crazy because I got to go cook my wife her birthday dinner.
See, that'll fix it. Yeah,
And-
exactly.
Pete, can you just leave your webcam running?
No.
And just stare at your back of your room?
No, because my kids want the bandwidth back.
Ah, children.
Well, that's a really good reason. Yeah.
So,
All right. So
good night, everybody.
all right. Thank you, Pete. See you later, buddy.
Bye.
All right. I'm going to ask the audience right now before I talk to Alan. Do you like this gallery view, or do you like the other view? So vote now. So Alan, hey man, how you doing?
Hey, I'm
It's-
okay.
It's like 10 o'clock in the morning, Monday morning, where you're at. Is that right?
Right, yeah, just before 10, yeah.
Okay. So been wanting to get you back on for a while. I see this really cool. This is your pinned tweet on. Alan's written a lot of books, so this is your pinned tweet on your
Yeah.
Twitter, which is just basically at Alan Baxter. A reader's guide to Alan Baxter: horror, dark, urban fantasy, supernatural, crime, noir, action, adventure. So I really like the way that you've organized this. This is great. So up at the top left, we got the Alex. Would you just talk about the different universes and trilogies, whatever that you've got going on here, and maybe give,
Yeah, sure.
for those who have not read you at all, maybe places to start, that kind of thing.
Sure. I mean, this is why that came about. Because it got to the point where I'd written quite a few things and quite a few different sort of series or whatever, and people would say, where do I start? And
Right.
so you could literally just start chronologically with the order that I release books. But again, that's not necessarily that easy to find without checking publication dates. So I made this graphic to sort of help people out. So my first two books were Realm Shift and Mage Sign. And then the next books that I wrote was the Alex Coyne series, which is Bound, Obsidian, and Abduction. So that's the trilogy and the duology at the top of that graphic.
Okay. Well, let's stop for a second. What kind of trilogy is Alex Coyne?
Okay, so it's usually billed as dark urban fantasy.
Okay.
There's a lot of magic and monsters and elder gods and stuff like that involved. Not specifically Lovecraftian ones, but very much in that vein.
Mm-hmm.
As most of my sort of cosmic stuff is, to be honest. I don't tend to use existing mythos, but I definitely sort of use those ideas.
So it shares the universe with the Balance duology, which is Realm Shift and Mage Sign, right?
Yeah, that's
and the Balance.
Yeah, so the Balance is an omnibus edition of those two novels together, plus a couple of short stories in World.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
Okay,
in an
yes, I
omnibus
missed
edition,
that.
yeah.
All right.
And they share the universe, but only really peripherally. There's a group and a couple of characters. Like the main characters from the Balance make a cameo appearance in the first Alex Coyne book. And so you can look at it as a shared universe, or you can look at it as an alternate universe. There's very little actual crossover, other than there's one group of sort of secretive mages that are in both groups, in both series. So, the same group is there. So you can assume it's the same universe, or you can assume it's an alternate version. So I'm never very strict on that sort of stuff.
And so it looks like, so far anyway, you've got two standalone novels, Devouring Dark and Hidden City. Is that right?
Yep. So, and this is often what I tell people if when they say, where do I start? So, well, if you like to read a big series, or you like to sort of dive into something you can be into for a while, then start with the Balance or the Alex Coyne series, and then you've got like 5 books there that you can read. If you want a taster and you're not sure, then you can start with the standalone novels, which are Devouring Dark and Hidden City, both of which are that sort of dark urban fantasy, and like all the others, like Alex Coyne and everything, it leans quite heavily into horror. So it's, I never, sometimes people say that I'm a horror writer or an urban horror writer, or when people say a lot of the time urban fantasy is considered a little bit lighter fare than my stuff, because somebody said that the Alex Kane series is like if Quentin Tarantino directed the Dresden Files. So it's a little bit like it's darker, it's grittier, it's nastier, but it sort of wanders around all those different borders of fantasy and horror. And,
well, I think Stephen King says he writes science fiction. He's always said that, right, Ben?
Right.
So,
somebody else said if Stephen King and Jim Butcher ever had a baby, it would be me. So that's a weird thought.
Well, yeah. Well, my point is, some people label an author this, some people label an author that. So, all right. Who is Alex Kane?
So Alex Kane, so this that whole series came about because I was about to say my day job is that I run a martial arts academy, but we've just been indefinitely shut down. So interesting times.
Yeah.
Hopefully the lockdown won't be for too long, because I've got very little.
Don't mean to interrupt. What kind of martial art?
Kung Fu. I teach a style called Choi Le Fat Kung Fu. And because of that, I guess a lot of fighting and martial arts finds its way into my books, and a lot of people started saying, you should do more of this because you write fight scenes really well. And it's like, well, I guess that's kind of what I've done my whole life. So I decided to write a series where the main character, rather than just being someone who could fight, the main character was actually a career martial artist. And so Alex Kane is a champion underground MMA fighter. So he fights in these cage matches. He doesn't like the glitz and the glamour of the mainstream events. So he goes and fights in sort of warehouses and underground arenas, and he's top of his game. He's having a great time. He's good at everything. And then he gets entangled in this sort of world of magic and monsters and stuff. And he wants nothing to do with it because his life is good. He's going great guns. He's top of the game and making good money. So he just keeps trying to get out of this thing he's dragged into. But in the nature of these things, of course, the harder he tries to get out, the deeper he gets dragged in, and it gets progressively worse over the course of 3 books for him.
How long have you been writing, Alan? You got quite a few books here.
Yeah, it's a difficult question. I've always made stuff up, I guess, is the bottom line. I've always written stories. Throughout my teens, I used to get a lot of my writing sort of itch scratched by running role-playing games. I would always enjoy being the GM rather than a player because I got to tell the story. I guess I started writing seriously in my mid to late 20s. I had a bit of a, not exactly a crisis, but I had this sort of feeling I was in a rut. I was doing all the same things. I was really kind of over everything. And I went off wandering the world for a couple of years. Mm-hmm. And discovered a lot of things. My wife, for one of them, and that's also why I live in Australia, because I was born and grew up in the UK. And while I was doing that, I realized that one of my passions had always been storytelling, and I should take it seriously. So I then decided, that was when I made the decision to actually write with a view towards publication. And so I then first started publishing in around 2006. So everything you see on that graphic really is between 2006 and now, I guess. So yeah, sort of 14 years.
Okay. Looks like you have 5. I love novellas, depending. Looks like you have 5 novellas here too. Are they shared universes, or are they just 5 novellas with different stories? They're just standalone novellas. For whatever reason,
I think especially with dark fiction, and that sort of dark fantastic vibe, and also with crime fiction, those sort of genres really lend themselves well to the novella format. It's a bit like, the 100-page movie script is the same as the 150-page novella. You got that self-contained thing, and it fits really well. And I love to explore ideas and characters and things bigger in a novel, but sometimes a novella is just the punch that you want. It's just the right sort of length. And quite often I'll have ideas, because I've got a couple of short story collections. I really love short fiction. And sometimes what I think initially is a short story, I'll start writing and realize there's a lot more meat to that story. Mm-hmm. But without other ideas or subplots, it's not a novel. And so it's like, okay, cool, that's a novella. And so, and they come from different places. Like most recently, The Roo is just a crazy creature feature that started as a joke on Twitter and ended up becoming an actual novella. And other ones are a lot more in line with my normal stuff. Like The Book Club is very much a sort of cosmic crossed crime, weird mystery kind of novellas.
Well, I've been wanting to have you on for a bit, for a while now, and actually, I think this is very good timing. Melissa mentioned before the show, perhaps giving people our recommendations for books to read, maybe movies to watch, so on and so forth, while we're all on this all in isolation, basically, or should be.
Yeah.
And the reason why I say this is good timing is because, obviously, anyone listening, go to Amazon, type in Alan Baxter, you're gonna see his books there. But if you'll go to his Twitter page, which again is at Alan Baxter, just his name, you'll see how all these fit together for the ones who do fit together, and you can start where you want. If you're looking for a new writer to go through their work, here's a great opportunity. So, you've got the shared universes at the top there of this picture I'm looking at. 5 novellas. You've got two short story collections, which I believe Served Cold is the latest, isn't it? Is that correct?
Yeah, that just came out at the end of last year. That September, I think, last year that one came.
Right, and you got some good blurbs on that, if I remember. Well, I mean, you have blurbs on your other books too, but I was just thinking of Serve Cold.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I was very lucky. Like Paul Tremblay, Chris Golden, people like that have been very kind to me, and were kind enough to offer their thoughts on the book. I had a novella middle of the year before last with Grey Matter Press called Manifest Recall, and Paul Tremblay read that and said very kind things about it. And I've actually got a sequel to that one coming out in the middle of this year. We've just been organising that with Grey Matter Press. And so when Serve Cold was being put together, I contacted Paul and said, hey, do you fancy reading again for me? And he was kind enough to do so and to say very kind things. So I feel very lucky on that front. There's a few people have said some really nice things. Keelan Burke as well has said some great things about my work, which is really gratifying.
Yeah, Paul's pretty busy right now, so that says a lot about the book. If you're listening and for those who are listening and you like short story collections, maybe start with Served Cold and go from there. So
yeah, I got pretty lucky with Paul on that front, that he was basically, because he's such a kind guy, he's such a nice guy and so generous, and he basically said, you know what, I have to shut my doors to everything right now. I've got too much sort of work to do, but he was kind enough to read my mind at the end of that period before it sort of started turning everything down. So I got very lucky. It was so much in this business, luck is a big factor.
Yeah, it sure is. You gotta have talent, but you have to have luck too. So
right.
Okay. Anything else? Who's David Wood? I'm sorry if this is an ignorant question, but you got novels co-authored with David Wood and a couple of shared universes. Looks like the Jake Crowley Adventures.
Yeah. So Dave Wood is he's an action adventure author. He's based out in New Mexico. We've known each other for a long time. He writes the Dane Maddock Adventures, which is, I think he's up to like 12 books or something in that series now. Real popular action adventure in that kind of like Indiana Jones, Doc Savage kind of vibe. And we decided to co-write some stuff because with my sort of horror and dark fiction audience and his action adventure audience, we thought it would be a nice combination. We could write together and see what we could do. So the first thing we did is we wrote a short novel called Dark Right, which is basically like it's a Hammer House of horror story, like a classic old B-movie horror that we just did that to test our chops working together. And it was okay, but we decided we needed to combine our styles a little bit more. So we now work on 2 series. So there's the Jake Crowley Adventures, which are basically sort of Dan Brown, Da Vinci Code kind of ideas, but with a lot more occult background to the things that they're investigating. And then there's the Sam Aston Investigations, which are again the same kind of action adventure, but they're giant monster stories. So the first one about a huge prehistoric lake monster, and the second one about a weird entity under the ice in the Antarctic. Very much our homage to At the Mountains of Madness. That one, like we riff off At the Mountains of Madness. The characters reference the book themselves throughout Overlord. So yeah, so they're a lot of good fun. And so and those 2 series are a shared universe, and they also occasionally have characters crossover with Dave's Dane Maddock books. So they're sort of it's a big shared universe there, but you can read any of the series individually without needing the others at all. But if you do read the others every once in a while, you get like an Easter egg. Hey, I know that guy from whatever book.
Okay. Anyone else have questions for Alan?
Yeah, Alan, I have any other plans to get more of the books on audiobook? I know Dark Right is an audiobook, which I have. Any of the other series, any plans to have them available for audio?
Yeah, there is. At the moment, it's difficult because of the way with indies and with territories. Like, for example, the Alex Kane series is published by HarperCollins on the Voyager imprint in Australia, but it's published with Griffinwood Press everywhere else. And the first book, Bound, is available now on Audible, as long as you're not in Australia and New Zealand, ironically. And book 2 is being recorded right now. So before long, that trilogy will be on Audible. I believe Hidden City is next in line for that. Realm Shift and Mage Sign, my original duology, the Balance duology, is already on Audible. And most of the stuff that I co-write with David Wood, if it's not yet, it will be. That always goes through. I think at this stage, at least Primordial is. I'm not sure if Overlord is out yet or not. And the Jake Crowley series is in queue if it's not done yet. So, as is the case with so much in Audible, it's a long lead time and production time, especially because as it gets more popular, good narrators get more and more work on. So it takes sort of longer and longer to work your way up the queue for them to get the work done. But most of that stuff, especially outside Australia, most of all that should be available on audio before the end of the year, with fingers crossed. But have a look, because a lot of it already is. Yeah.
Plus the expense too. You know, it's a big additional expense to get an audiobook done.
It is, and a lot of the time you find people who are prepared to work on a royalty share rather than an upfront fee. But of course, the best narrators, they just want to get paid for their work, understandably. So you tend to have to find an upfront fee for the best narrators, or you come to an arrangement with a narrator who will do a lot of your work because they enjoy your work, they enjoy the feedback and whatever, and then they're happy to work royalty on subsequent books. So that can sometimes work. So it's always a negotiation on that front.
The one thing I do love, Alan, is the action scene. So I've also read your book on how to do great fight scenes. So in books, and I really love that because I do love military horror, and reading folks like Jonathan Mayberry or Weston Oakes, or even a fellow, I think he's Australian, Greg Beck. I'm not sure how to pronounce it.
Greg Beck, yeah.
Greg Beck. So he also has a series, Alex Hunter, I think. But lots of action, and I really do enjoy and appreciate really realistic fight scenes, because I think you're absolutely right. If the action is bad, it will pull you out of the story, even if the rest of the story is really good.
I didn't know you wrote a book about realistic fight scenes. How to write realistic fight scenes. That's cool.
Yeah, that's
what's the title?
It's called Write the Fight Right.
Write the Fight Right. Okay.
And it's a very short ebook only kind of instructional. And like Rich says, when there's a bad fight scene, you notice it, and a lot of people at conventions and writers' centers started contacting me and said, you write good fight scenes. Can you come and run a workshop on that? So yes, of course, any additional income stream for a writer is valuable. So I started developing a workshop. So I've done it like as a 2-hour workshop at a convention. I've done it as an all-day workshop at writers' centers and stuff like that. And people were always saying afterwards, is there something to follow up? And I would always give notes with the workshop. So eventually I basically took what we cover in the workshop, wrote it out in a little bit more long form detail, and put it out as an ebook. So you can find it on Kindle. It's not even, it's like a super long essay really, more than an actual book, but it just covers lots of points about fighting, especially from a writing point of view. Like in the movies, it's very two-dimensional and it's structured in such a way to look good on film. And when you just do a transcription of that into a book, it's terrible. It doesn't work. There's no immediacy. So when you're actually fighting and you're writing about it from inside character point of view, smells and sounds and adrenaline and all that sort of stuff, you can describe and get inside characters that way. And so I just took my experience of training and competition fighting and all that sort of stuff and put it together as a writer's guide like that.
Not only a fight scene written right, but a fight scene written in an interesting way. I've been reading for almost 50 years now, and I find in some books I'm really fascinated with the book and everything, but when they get to the fight scene, I sort of gloss over it, because in my view, it's not very interesting. So, yeah, okay, ebook, Write the Fight Right. For
A lot of the time you
see
is because a lot of the time people we were always told to write what you know, which is I hate that advice because that we'd all write such boring books if that was the case. But you do need to know what you're writing about. So one of the best things about fiction for me is the fact that I get to go and research stuff and I'm like, oh, I want to write about this, cool, and I have to go and learn about it. And when people do that for action and fight scenes, they tend to watch a movie or they remember the fights they've seen in films, and so it doesn't work on the page. So ideally everybody would sort of go to classes and learn a bit about fighting and do some sparring or whatever, but that's not as easy necessarily for a lot of people. So and I think that's why a lot of the time action and fight scenes fall down like that, like Rich mentioned with military horror. I've written a bunch of stories for the Snafu anthologies, which are basically military horror. Squads getting into complete messes. I explore a lot of sort of cosmic themes with those stories as well. And just the emotional and the adrenalized nature of those situations is hard to convey unless you've felt physically threatened and kind of experienced those things yourself. And so when you just watch it in a movie and people just you don't get that emotional content, and when that emotional content isn't existing in the written work, then it doesn't come across well, especially when the rest of the book is probably quite emotionally charged. So I think that's the underlying problem.
I would also comment, though, that in the movie, it's very important that things be choreographed well, that it works as visually this is plausible, and visually the people look like they're at risk. Like I was just thinking when you're talking about filming a scene with fencing, and like the best fencing, some of the best fencing on screen has been choreographed by a world champion fencer named William Hobbs. And so if you watch his fencing scenes from like Rob Roy or the 1974 Three Musketeers movies, it has a lot more, depth, meat to it, more resonance, because it comes across as this really could be happening this way, because it's so carefully laid out ahead of time.
Yeah, a lot of the time you find that with a fight scene of any kind, like weapons certainly, but even just fist fights, you'll be reading, and even if you can't pick it yourself quite why, if you read something that's just sort of physically not possible or physically weird, your brain will notice that hitch. And you're like, really? Just stop and think for a minute. How did he hit him with that? How did he hit him if his arm was behind his back? Stuff like that.
Takes you out of the story a bit.
Yeah, so the choreographing is important, and when you're just choreographing turn-based movie punch-ups, where this guy does 3 punches and then this guy punches back 3 times and stuff like that, it can look exciting on 2-dimensional film, but there's no real truth to it. There's no real authenticity to it, and that becomes the problem. So, I mean, a number of times I've knocked things off these shelves and whatever because I stand up and quickly work through something and make sure I'm doing, working out. This will probably work. Or I asked my wife, I'm like, can you just help me out a second? She's like, oh, God, all right. And so she's like punching me in the face and checking how we're going to work these things out for choreography to make it work. So,
you ask your wife to punch you in the face?
Well, she's a master in her own right these days. She's the second in charge at our academy. We run the martial arts school together. So yeah, she knows what she's doing.
Or does she just do it because she's upset at you because you didn't take out the trash or something?
Yeah, I will say, Alan, that I know a lot of folks in the military who are horror fans. They are very aware of the Snafu series, and I've not met anybody who doesn't like the Snafu series. So I would say you guys are doing it right, all of you authors who contribute to that, because it's for folks who do that for a living. They like it and they think it's realistic. So.
Well, that's really good to hear. And I might actually just put a quick plug in if that's all right, because
sure.
I'm sure you guys know James A. Moore.
Mm-hmm.
he's been struggling a lot with cancer and stuff like that.
Yeah, he has.
And at the moment, I think he's just kind of gotten all clear, but he's got massive bills and stuff for his treatment. And so Cohesion Press put together a special edition, a new snafu that's just up for pre-order now. And all the proceeds from that are going to go to Jim up until he's paid his bills. And then after that, continued proceeds will go into cancer charities. And it's called Snafu Medivac. And it's got an original story from me, an original story from Greg Beck, I think 2 other original stories, and 4 or 5 reprints from previous Snafu anthologies.
Snafu Medivac?
Medivac, yeah.
Okay.
So a really good one to if you don't know the series, this is a great one to jump on board and pre-order. I think it's out in about a month or so, but the pre-order's up now. For the ebook, the print will follow. But that's for a great cause, because Jim's such a great guy. And
yeah, he's a nice guy.
Yeah,
before we move on, I think Ben has a comment or question.
Yeah. So one thing I just wanted to add on to is I also trained martial arts and was in the military. And one thing writers should never do is watch films as a reference for either of those 2 things, because as you mentioned, in films, they need it to look cool. They don't need it to be realistic. And those are 2 very different things. And especially if you're trying to write a story with a lot of suspense and accuracy, that fight scene's not going to go the same. And on top, I mean, the military especially, and I'm sure Rich and Bridget could agree to this, especially anything made before, say, 2000, no one did any. I always think back to Predator, for example, and you see how they hold M16s in that movie. And it's like no one in the real world would ever fire a rifle that way. You would never hit anything. But in films, like Arnold Schwarzenegger couldn't really hold a rifle correctly. He was on too many steroids. So they just made do, and it didn't matter because it looked cool. And in fight scenes, I always think back, Donnie Yen made a couple of great films, and he used a lot of jiu-jitsu in his films and more MMA-style fighting. And it was really great to watch because it was like, oh, wow, this is like a realistic fight. It's not, I'm going to punch 7 times, and you're going to punch 7 times, and I'm going to punch this other guy 4 times and kick this other one over here, where it's turn-based. It was a very, I don't want to say realistic, but more accurate way to watch it.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of. Sorry, Alan. Please go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say when I teach the workshops, if I have a longer time to do one of the sort of all-day workshops, one of the things that we start with is I show a few clips from movies, just to give people an idea of sort of how bad movies are as a reference. And 2 of the clips I show, one is from a Jackie Chan movie, which is just, it's comedic in the way that it does the fighting, and that's why it works for the movie, because it's comedy, it's fun, it's 2 people dancing around each other. And then I show a clip from one of the Jason Bourne movies, and without actually checking my notes, I can't remember which one it is, but it's one where they fight in an apartment, and at the end he puts some magazines in a toaster and turns the gas on to blow the place up when he leaves.
It's the second one.
Yeah, second
that's
one.
A movie. Yeah, and as Mythbusters proved, that would never work, that bit with the toaster. But that fight preceding that part is a really good example of a fight scene in a movie because of the way that it's shot. It's incredibly hectic. They're doing all kinds of things to each other. They're grappling. They're getting tripped up by the furniture in the room, and they're using like cords from the curtains and stuff like that. And it's one of the few examples of a fight scene in a movie that's done well. But even then, if you just transcribe that without the emotion and the internal aspects, it would still not work on the page. So yeah, exactly that with that. And that's why I use those clips at the start of the workshop to show that, this is one done for comedic effect. This is one that's done quite realistic. Both of these are no good if you transcribe them. You need more in a book to make it authentic.
Okay, so I gotta ask.
I just want to add about the Jason Bourne thing. One of the great things they do, and you mentioned the emotion, is he has the adrenaline dump afterwards, where he's sitting there and his hands are shaking and he can't focus.
Yeah, when he backs up from the guy and he can't quite believe he's won that fight, and he's looking around like, is it over? Is it over? And even for someone as experienced as him, that is quite a realistic moment. Yeah.
Yes.
So I got to ask before we move on, just because this has been brought up. The Christian Bale Batman movies, they're terrific.
Yeah.
You correct me if you think I'm wrong. I don't think the fight scenes are very good. Now, whatever you think of, say, Batman v Superman, the movie itself, but towards the end of the movie, that scene where Batman rescues Martha Kent, Superman's mom, and invades. If you've seen that movie, that was a hell of a fight scene in my view. So, what are your thoughts as a professional between those two?
Well, I agree with you on the Chris Nolan, on the Christian Bale ones. I haven't actually seen Batman versus Superman, so I can't comment on that. But now
You're
it's one of
dead to
those
me.
ones that's been on the list. It's been on the list for ages to watch. But now, having just said that about a fight scene at the end, now it's moved up the list several places based on that. So I will definitely have to check it out.
All right. Well, if you do watch Batman v Superman at some point, do not watch the theater version. Watch the extended version. That theater release cut was just shambles. So yeah. When you do watch that, shoot me an email, man. Let me know what you think. So it's incredible. Okay. If anyone else have a question for Alan before we move on? How's everybody dealing with your isolation? You going nuts? I just look at Ben. I can tell he's going nuts. So, I got a question. Why are people watching series and movies like Pandemic and Contagion? Why?
Yeah, I heard they were like #1 streaming at this point. I don't know. I guess people want
Why?
to live. Like,
Actually, it's not a
watch
surprise.
they're like, let me
It's a
find out.
surprise to me.
They're like, people want to find out what's going to happen. They want to see what happens in the movie. And be like,
Yeah, I think
How
even
does the
Stephen
movie
King,
end?
Stephen King tweeted, "Okay, this is not like The Stand, people." You know.
I saw a
I think
meme.
people want these things because they want to see something that's worse than what's happening right now. And so, if this is bad enough, everything that's going on, but those movies like Contagion or whatever, it's 10 times worse. And so it's like, okay, this is shit, but it's not that bad.
See, I'm the
I
opposite.
think
I don't want to think about it because there's nothing I can do about it other than self-isolate and do the 5 as they say. But yeah, if I'm going to watch a horror film, it's going to be anything but something like Contagion or Pandemic.
Yeah, I'm saying. Yeah.
So, but apparently a lot of
I think-
people disagree with me.
We talked about this on the Patreon podcast a bit, and one thing we compared it to is after September 11th, 24 was the most popular show on TV. Or during the war for Iraq, Band of Brothers was the most popular thing. So I think it goes back to what we said about writers sort of looking at movies sometimes for inspiration. And I think regular people, they want to know more, but they don't want to go read like scholarly articles about pandemics. So they go watch Outbreak starring Dustin Hoffman and think that that's giving them more information so they understand what's going on better.
They actually think that.
Makes sense.
I
think that makes sense. Some of the movies, I was just listening to a podcast, and it was someone who was in, like, I'm trying to think, some government organization, and they really studied pandemics, and they were consulted for Contagion. So there is like some truth. It's not like there's truth to the movie, but there is like a basis of fact and some realism to it. You know, so it's like the historical fiction or something, where it's like you don't want to read the actual history book, but you're like, well, I'll read a story. There's a love story in this where people are
Well, I
dying.
hope it's an alternative history. I think that's probably what we're going for.
I hope
Let's
so.
hope it remains fiction. Yeah.
For Contagion, though, it's like, for me, that, I don't know what you think, I thought it was a very emotionally distant movie with uninvolving characters. So it doesn't, like, bring anything home at all. I actually thought the original Andromeda Strain was a much more emotionally resonant film.
I noticed
It's a great
too.
film.
I noticed too that movies that would normally just be in the theater, they're releasing on video on demand, like Amazon and so forth. Invisible Man? Is out on VOD. And if you want to watch these movies, you can rent them in the United States for $20. So, yeah, ouch. Well, there's two ways to look at it. If it's just if I'm the only one in the house interested in the movie, that's a lot of money. Because if I went to the theater, I'd spend $8 or $10 on the ticket. But that's if I didn't get any popcorn or anything, and then I'd go way past that $20 probably. So I don't know. I can wait on Invisible Man, but then Wonder Woman 84 they say is going to be released straight to video on demand with, I'm sure, that price tag. So
This is a time where you wish we still had drive-in like movie drive-ins. You know, everyone could self-isolate their car, drive up to like the movie drive-in.
actually, it's
Have
funny
it-
you should say that because I've got one like 15 miles away that we go
I
to
have,
occasionally.
yeah, we have one. I don't know what they're going to do. I mean, like if they will be open or if it's just going to be shut down. Who knows? The summer is far out. They're not open. this
Yeah.
time of year,
Well,
but-
here in Texas, it's open 365 days a year, including Christmas. But I haven't checked to see if they're open. I noticed another drive-in theater on the web. They said they made a point of saying we're open, we're keeping people distant from each other, you know. So I don't know. Yeah, I think going to the drive-ins a lot of fun, but
It is. Yeah.
It will work if you have a big screen TV at home
mhm.
and somebody else in the house who wants to see the movie, because then it's like you bought 2 tickets and you're seeing a movie on a big screen.
Right. Yeah.
I was going to say invite your friends over, but not in this environment.
Well, we can't even watch drive-in movies like we did when I was in high school, where 4 of us were stuffed in the trunk to get into the movie theater. That's just too close these days.
Yeah, you definitely can't do that. But is it Matt? Are you the one who's hosting? Do you host like a movie night?
Yeah,
Oh,
Lovecraft
that's something
eZine
that-
movie night.
Yeah,
Mike
so-
started that a couple years ago. It used to be on a forum called Rabbit, which tanked, and so now we're on an application called Cast, which has its problems. But
KAST, by the way.
as many as say 100 people could watch it, but we never really have more than 6, 7, 8 people. And you're asking for recommendations to watch while in quarantine. I've actually got together a list of most everything that we've watched in the last year and a half, and there's some pretty damn good stuff on it.
I swear to God, if you mention Big Ass Spider, I'm booting.
We haven't watched that, Mike.
Okay.
Okay, you happy now? We haven't watched it.
I'm happy.
I cry alone.
How was The Man from Earth? Had you seen that one before last
No,
night?
but you know, one of my favorite anthologies I read from the 60s when I was a kid growing up was a selection of stories from The Unknown, a pulp magazine picked out by Isaac Asimov. And there was a story in it called The Gnarly Man by L. Sprague de Camp. So this story is 50 years old now, something? I don't know. It was about a guy who worked as a circus freak, and it turned out he was a Neanderthal. And he had lived for more than 40,000 years, just hiding on the fringes of society. And he had to pick jobs where the fact that he was very hairy and didn't smell like a real person, or a human person, and had kind of a different posture, that all played into what he was able to do. And it very much reminded me of that.
Except that I don't
actually-
think that's realistic. I think humans 40,000 years ago looked, by and large, like we do.
Yeah, but when did the last Neanderthal die?
I don't know, but I know the guy in The Man from Earth is not a Neanderthal.
Right. No, I'm just saying that this movie it resonated very similarly with me with that short story. Like, how would you avoid detection?
Yeah.
You know, I also came up to the conclusion that to be able to actually tolerate that existence, where everybody you knew is dust, and everybody who knew them is dust, and most of your children are dust. It's like to be able to continue going without like saying, like, would anyone really want to live to be 120 and be so far out of time that their children have passed?
That's what I like so much about The Man from Earth, is because the protagonist he has the attitude and disposition of someone who's lived for so long. Unlike, you know, a lot of vampire movies and everything where the vampire is just as immature as, say, somebody that's 30 years old. But in The Man from Earth, he's got quite a different outlook, and he generally he sees himself, and he really is outside humanity. So,
but to be able to tolerate that, I think you'd have to be a little bit sociopathic. That
you would have to be.
That the fate.
But you probably would have to grow into that, though.
I don't know. It's the fate of all these people. It's like all you do is move on. Move on every 10 years, and
he moves on every 10 years. And by the way, there's a sequel to The Man from Earth. Don't watch it. If you have the DVD, just burn it. So I was looking forward to that sequel for so long, and man, did they screw that up.
I just want to say they do kind of address this towards the end of the film, the first one. Mm-hmm. The idea that he has to keep moving on, why he has to do that, and then they give a direct example on why he does that.
Yep.
The second one just basically rehashes, like, it takes one of the worst parts of the first film and makes that 80% of the movie. And it just rehashes like almost everything from the first film.
Yeah, it's not even worth
don't watch it.
Just pretend like you don't know what happens after the end for The Man from Earth, because that's what I'm doing.
There's a Twilight Zone episode which had a similar premise, with Kevin McCarthy as an immortal.
And Jerome Bixby, who wrote the story that it's based on, he turned it into a Star Trek episode.
Requiem for Methuselah?
Yes.
Yeah, in fact, he and his son, Ben, wrote The Man from Earth while Jerome Bixby was on his deathbed. That's what I read.
And so, if I remember correctly, this was a story he wrote. He then turned it into a Star Trek episode, but he always wanted to do like a proper version of it, and that was Man from Earth.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I've got this list of movies, which if you're looking for something to watch, I'm going to post it on the eZine Facebook page. And it's a pretty good survey of interesting cosmic horror. It doesn't include a lot of the movies that Mike chose when he was picking them. I kind of like to add those to the list too, because that really fleshes it out. It's actually quite a nice series.
Thank you.
So if you can look at the list and think what you can add to it.
Okay, anybody else want to recommend anything for all of us quarantined at home? Melissa? Am I putting you on the spot?
Yes, you are. No,
Sorry.
but I guess since I suggested it, I should have.
It was your idea, damn it.
I actually have some ideas.
All right.
So first off, and he actually posted on the Lovecraft eZine, our Facebook group. But Douglas Wynn's Smoke and Dagger is such a good book. It is so fun. So first off, it's like Lovecraftian, but it's also historically based because it's set, I think, in the late 1940s, and they actually has Jack Parsons as one of the characters. Who, if you don't know who he is, he's a really interesting character. He was both a rocket scientist and he was really involved in the occult. So that kind of gives you an idea of where things were going. But there's
a TV series about him on CBS.
Really?
All access, called Strange Angels.
He's interesting. I read a book about him before, and he's just like a really fascinating character. Like everything about his life was very odd. Like his death was like, there was a lot of strange things going on. I mean, so just for that, it's just like already an interesting piece of history, an interesting character. But then
that book is on sale right now, right? Doug put it on sale.
Yeah, he had put it up for free for a while, and I don't know if it's still free, but I loved it, and it was kind of like a fun pulpy book that you it's like Lovecraftian beach reading. Like it doesn't take a lot of effort. Like if you're kind of people feel stressed out right now, you can just read that book and it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of over the top action, kind of it's a great book, but it's it has definitely a good bit of Lovecraftian stuff for all the Lovecraft fans, and it has.
Okay, I just looked it up. I just looked it up, Melissa. Two things. First of all, it is still free on Kindle.
Okay.
Secondly, it's on Kindle Unlimited, so even if it does go up soon, if you're in Kindle Unlimited, you can borrow it.
I listened to it on. He has an audio book of it that I listened to, and that was really good too. I was because I have a long commute, it made my commute very enjoyable. Just saying, it's a fun story. All of his Spectrophiles books are really good.
Yeah, it's the first in his series, isn't it?
It's a prequel. It's one of the main characters, I think grandmother. So it kind of ties in neatly that you can read it on its own. Like, you don't have to have read any of the other Spectra Files novels to get it. Like, it's fun. So that's my one. And then my other one is a post-apocalyptic book. It's actually called Born, and it's by Jeff Vandermeer. I just read that, and I don't know if people are really in the mood for post-apocalyptic fiction right now.
I'm
but,
not. I'm sure it's a great book because he's a good writer, but I'm not.
It actually it made me cry in a few areas because it's like very touching, but it has a really positive message at the end. Like, I think ultimately, like, I think he wrote Annihilation. I would define that as cosmic horror, but this I wouldn't even define as cosmic horror. It's weird, borderline weird fiction, but like, it's very humanistic focused. Like, even though it shows a lot, like, basically there's a character, Rachel, she's a scavenger, and she finds a piece of biotech that she names Born. And this creature, when it starts out, it almost looks like a sea anemone, and it grows and starts looking like a squid, but it can like change forms. The issue is, it's almost kind of like if you just say adopt like a baby wolf. Like, it's cute at first, you know, and it's adorable, and you want to take care of it, but as it grows, it becomes something that you can't control. And becomes like very like wild. So that is like a theme, and it just like, I don't want to give, like we were talking about with book reviews, I don't want to give too much away. I just kind of wanted to talk about some of the themes, and like ultimately it is very engaging, and I think it has like a good ending. Like, it has a kind of like a positive ending that does like in some way make you have like feel good about humanity.
Okay, what's the title again?
Born, Borne.
Okay.
By Jeff Vandermeer.
Not Jason Bourne, but just Bourne.
Just Born.
Just Bourne.
Yeah.
I know that Rick wants to recommend a YouTube channel, but before he does, I just want to very quickly say that I didn't think I would like this, but the Harley Quinn series, the new Harley Quinn series on DC Universe, is fucking hilarious, man. Have you seen it, Ben? No? Oh, man. You're missing out. It's hilarious.
So where can you watch that?
DC Universe. It's just another channel that you can Google DC Universe. You can, if you've got a smart TV or a Roku, you can put it on there. I assume.
Is this animated or live action?
It's animated.
It's animated. Yeah, it's done in the style, though it's not. It's like mature rated as an animated series.
Lots of swearing, lots of innuendo, but it's all.
The animation style matches the animated series, so it's kind of fun to watch in that context. And keep in mind, DC Universe, if you do the free trial, they have all the DC animated movies from all the recent ones, like Superman Red Son. And they also have like 15,000 issues of DC Comics. It's almost everything from like the mid 80s to a year ago.
You can put it on your Roku, or you can put it on your, say, tablet or phone to read the comics, for example, or to watch those shows. So, yeah. Good point, Ben. There's a lot of content. So, yeah, it's a very funny series. Rick, you got a YouTube channel to recommend?
Yeah, Blue Worm, BLU Worm. One word.
Okay.
And it's done by a man named Richard Swenson, who does slow motion special effects in the story in the style of Ray Harryhausen. And he had done a film that a lot of us saw a few years ago called The Shadow Out of Time, which was a good adaptation of that, about 15 minutes. And he's made a lot of other short Lovecraftian films since then. Dagon, The Other Gods. Very nice adaptations.
Okay. Anyone else want to recommend anything before we?
Yeah, I'm gonna be finishing Alan's book, Dark Right. On audio book.
Who?
And I think his last name's Baxter. I'm not. He's like this.
Oh, the guy raising his hand. Okay, got it.
He's from Down Under. I think he listens to a lot of
Down Under on the screen too.
But no, and also John Horner Jacobs' This Dark Earth. It is a zombie novel, and I have that on audio, so I'll be listening to that.
Okay. Anybody else? Yeah,
sure.
Bridget.
So I would recommend the Blackwater Saga by Michael McDowell. For those who may not be familiar with him, he wrote the script for Beetlejuice, but he wrote a lot of Southern Gothic horror. And
Elementals too, right?
yes, Elementals is really good too. But the Blackwater Saga is a really longer. I listened to it on Audible, so it'll take a little bit of time for you to listen to. But I really loved it. Sort of a Creature from the Black Lagoon vibe, but in a positive sort of light. The monster
It's
is not necessarily the monster kind of story.
it's almost a deep one story.
Yes. So that one's great. And then also, We Are Where the Nightmares Go, C. Robert Cargill. There's a particular short story in there called The Butcher that really stuck with me when I read it. I can't really say too much about it without giving it away, but there's a lot of really good stories in that collection, so recommend those.
The publisher sent me this. For those who can't see this, it's called Fractured Tide. It's by Leslie Lutz. I have not read it yet because of my TBR pile, and I don't think it's out yet. But you can pre-order it. I really like the premise, so I know I'm going to be diving into this sometime soon. So again, Fractured Tide by Leslie Lutz. I won't read the whole synopsis, but it says Lost meets Stranger Things. So anyway, looks pretty interesting. Anyone else? No.
I'm reading at the moment. This is probably well out of date for most of you guys, but getting around to one of those old classics that you missed out on. I don't know how to say the name properly. Is it Kathy Koja or Kathy Koya or something?
I think it's Kathy Koja.
The book is Cipher. Yeah.
Cipher.
So I'm reading that. I'm about I'm about 3/4 of the way through at the moment, and it's just blowing my mind. It's an amazing.
That is a fantastic book, man.
What is it called again?
The Cipher.
Cipher.
Okay.
Cipher.
Yeah.
I'm adding these all to my Amazon wish list.
Yeah, the writing style is incredible. It's the sort of first-person conversational style that it's written in is incredibly compelling. But it's just weird fiction of the weirdest kind, and the way that it's there it is. Yeah. So the way that it's sort of built, the way the story is built and structured, it's really quite something. I'm only 3/4 through right now, but I'm just really loving it.
It's really great, and the other three of hers that I have in paperback are Skin, Strange. Get to the camera here. Strange Angels, and I love this title, Bad Brains. So, but Kathy's a phenomenal writer, and
yes, incredible.
And it's, in America, at least, it's only $4 on Kindle right now.
Okay, good to know.
Wow.
All right. Anyone else? Next week we've got. I should have this pulled up ahead of time. I did want to mention one other thing. A movie called. In our Thursday $10 and Up Patreon podcast the other night. I was talking about how I was looking for stories set in microcosms like hospitals or apartment complexes. So, and then I run across this on the Daily Dead website. Apartment building becomes hellish prison in official trailer and poster for 1BR. I guess that's the title of the movie. And it's getting really great reviews. And it comes out, I think they said it was April 24th. So, but you can, if you Google it, 1BR trailer, you can watch that. And so April 24th, I'm looking forward to that. It's just so funny, I ran across it right after looking for horror stories set in apartment complexes. Yeah, revival, Matt.
Okay, so if you want to win the book this week, all you have to do is write an email to ezineprizes@gmail.com. Put revival in the subject heading. In about 2 weeks, someone randomly will be selected, and the book will be mailed to you.
Next week, we're going to talk with Kevin Lucia, who is a writer who's very much a quiet horror writer, which I love. Uh, Charles Grant is another one that I love in that vein, and I know Kevin does too. So, between now and then, if you want to check out some of his books, Kevin Lucia, that's Lucia. And then the week after that, Michael Sisko. So, that'll be interesting. All right, everyone. Everybody stay safe. Stop touching your face like I did through 25% of this podcast.
I've been watching myself touch my face again and again.
You're bad influence, Mike. I have to say, I kept touching. I'm like, no.
Everybody on the internet was making fun of the lady who was I forget who she is, health some kind of health professional that was making the announcement that you're not supposed to do this, and then she licks her fingers and turns the page. And everyone's making fun of her. If I would have done that, I would have owned it. I would have put out a tweet saying, "Look, people, you see how freaking hard this is? I can't even do it." So anyway, yeah, and Ben, as you pointed out, for those of us with glasses, we're constantly adjusting them. So what you just have to do the best you can do. But anyway, seriously, everyone stay safe. I hope these podcasts are, at least in some small way, helping you not feel quite so isolated. And I appreciate all you guys being with me. And we'll see everybody next week.